Welcome everyone to the webinar today of the Texas Assessment Collaborative, sponsored by LEAP Texas. Today we're talking about IRB approval, institutional approval for the Texas Assessment Collaborative project. The webinar today will be presented by, if I can go back a slide, there we go. It's going to be presented by me, Larry King from Stephen F. Austin State University, Chris Duke from San Jacinto College, and we are both assessment fellows with LEAP Texas. And we are working with the Texas Assessment Collaborative project. For this webinar, if you have any questions, you can send them during the webinar itself through the chat window. You can find that chat window in the GoToMeetings control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen, and the chat is toward the bottom of that panel. You can type in your question there. We will be able to see that question, and we'll try to respond to those maybe during the session or at the end of the session also. Also, this presentation and recording of the webinar is going to be available to you on the LEAP Texas website, and you can go there and find what you need as far as information on the Texas Assessment Collaborative and the other webinars that have already occurred dealing with the Texas Assessment Collaborative. Also, you can get involved in the conversation at using Twitter, hashtag LeapTexas at LeapTexas. You can also respond to and make comments on the blog at leaptexas.org. Today, our webinar, we're going to have two perspectives, as we have basically done with all of our webinars. We're going to be looking at the Texas Assessment Collaborative. We're going to focus on the IRB plan for the Texas Assessment Collaborative and how we will be, what we'll be concerned about with IRB in the Texas Assessment Collaborative. We'll also be looking at two different institutions, one a community college, one a state university, and the IRB considerations on those local campuses. We're going to divide this workshop up into 5 segments. We're going to talk about sample collection and some submission requirements for the Texas Assessment Collaborative. We're going to talk about the protection of human participants and IRB in the Texas Assessment Collaborative. We'll also have something to say about FERPA. We're going to look at the draft language for the IRB or institutional approval for the Texas Assessment Collaborative. Then we're going to talk about 2 local campuses and the considerations and practices on those local campuses.
Okay, so as we start to talk about kind of what we may want to expect our local institutions in terms of an institutional review board approvals or institutional approvals, I want to start with kind of the approach that we're taking for this project around sample collection and submission requirements. Really our emphasis, because we know that we need to deal with these local IRB concerns and institutional approval, we're efforting to design the project to attend to those, to make that process easier for all of us at our local institutions. And there's really kind of 2 things that we're keeping in mind, is that we want to maintain the anonymity of individuals, and then also the confidentiality of the institutions that are participating. So what we're doing, what we expect once we get into this next fall around the submission requirements for the institutions that are participating in the Texas Assessment Collaborative, is that first, any and all documents that are submitted are comprehensively de-identified. Now, when I say comprehensively, that's a little bit more than just the headings, which I think kind of jumps out at us. You know, if we jump into a document, you see student names, student identifying information at the top, faculty names in the heading, or even institutional names in the headings and stuff. That's something that I think all of us would think to remove. But there's other things that we've also got to make sure that we check. One is the full text of the document. If there happens to be any assignments that are submitted that have to do with any sort of reflection by individual students, they could be mentioning or identifying themselves or faculty or their institution during the text of the paper. So those are also things that we'll be asking folks to make sure that they redact from documents before submitting them. The other thing that probably hides in the documents is that we're also going to be focusing, or not really focusing, but looking for any metadata. And that's the information that if students are working in Microsoft Office, a Word document, and they save it, there's typically metadata in the background that indicates who the owner or the creator of that document is, that it borrows from their registration information when they installed or when they created their account for Microsoft Office. So that we're going to be asking that we comprehensively de-identify documents to eliminate this variable of quote-unquote personally identifiable information. The second thing is that it's not just student information we'll be looking for to de-identify and to remove. We'll be removing any information about the student, about the faculty teaching the course itself, and then also the institution from which that document would be submitted. And that's going to kind of fold into, you know, once we get into the specific logistics of how to submit, we'll have a coding system so that we'll know which documents are submitted, go back to which institution, but none of that information will be contained in the documents themselves, since those documents are going to be evaluated by different evaluators from across the participating institutions. The third thing is that we will be submitting these documents through a secure upload to a secure system to maintain the integrity of that confidentiality and the security of that information. And then last is that when we do, if or when we publish data around this project, it's going to be published in aggregate only. There will not be any disaggregation at any level. It will be, this is what we saw and this is the results that we saw across the entire project. There will never be any public publication by this project specifically or directly from us of any particular results at levels subordinate to that. So there won't be any results published by about institutions, the participating institutions. Now, we do expect to make that data available to those institutions, but what they do with it and how they handle it is up to them as an individual institution. And so those are kind of the submission requirements that we already have in mind that help attend to a lot of the concerns that we're going to talk about through the remainder of this presentation. So the next segment, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the protection of human participants in research and institutional review boards, and really kind of back up a step and not necessarily assume that anyone has a particular level of familiarity with those issues. And so the first thing is, and when I say back up and look at an overview, I mean backing up quite a ways, but briefly. The first thing is that there is a federal policy on the protection of human subjects in research, and that's based on the Belmont Report in 1979 that outlined kind of those fundamental ethical principles in research that involve other people. The specific federal policy that we're referencing was published in 1991. It's available on Health and Human Services, the federal government website. And then when we put this website or this information out on the archive, these links should be available and active so that you can get to those. Now, we expect that there's likely minimal implications for this project because of the way we're designing it, designing the submissions, and that's intentional, but we still want to address and talk about these things on point to inform your local processes at your institution. So kind of the fundamental components of this project is that, you know, our short-term vision and the immediate goal for the project is that we're going to have faculty from multiple Texas colleges and universities assessing samples of student work against the LEAP value rubrics so that we can better understand student attainment of the Texas core objectives. Now, I reiterate that short-term vision in order to talk about some of the policy definitions and implications of the federal policy on protection of human participants. The first is that the policy applies to those projects that involve human subjects, which we clearly do because we're talking about taking samples of student work. The second is the systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. This one's a little bit more gray for us because it's not necessarily research, it's more kind of institutional effectiveness processes. And while we are doing this to understand how our local students are performing within a larger state context, we're not trying to develop generalizable knowledge or theory or your typical academic research. This is more assessment and institutional effectiveness. The third thing is that obtains data through interaction with the individual or identifiable private information. And so this is one of the reasons why we do have an interaction in this process with students, because they're responding to assignments at their local institution. We're using the student response to those assignments, but this identifiable private information is something that we're making sure, and that's one of the reasons why we're de-identifying all of this, is so that we don't have that information within the documents that are submitted from the participating institutions. So the policy requirements is that there is a local determination that the research has been reviewed and may be conducted at an institution within the constraints that are set forth by the local institution. And there's 3 different levels of review that an institutional review board may have. One is a full review, the second is an expedited review, and the third is an exemption, depending upon the characteristics of the project. Again, we are designing this project so that we hope, though this is up to local institutional review boards, of course, but we hope that these will be exempt from the IRB review. But again, that determination has to be made by your local institution. At most, it may be an expedited review. And again, all these decisions are made at your local institutions. If you have a full IRB, or it may be just a discussion and a review, an informal review of like by a chief academic officer or your research office. If you're at, like I am, at a community college that has maybe an informal IRB or just has administrators reviewing the project and essentially making the determination that it's appropriate given the constraints of the project. So again, we're designing it so that it's either exempt or expedited, hopefully. Now, specifically, the reasons why, the first exemption status, the first reason research may be exempt is that if it's conducted in established or commonly accepted educational settings involving normal educational practice. And you can see the rest of the description of that exemption, and it specifically mentions the effectiveness of a comparison among instructional techniques. And so the effort that we're making statewide is exactly that. We are essentially taking the samples of student work that occur through normal educational settings, and we're working collaboratively to make the comparison and the effectiveness of what's going on and provide that larger context to our local practices so that we can improve instructional techniques, curricular, classroom management methods. The second exemption status, and again, these links that you're seeing at the top of each slide will get you out to these specific sections of the federal policy. The second exemption status says research involving the use of educational tests, survey procedures, or observation of public behavior. And so that the interview procedures, the educational tests, the student documents in response to an assignment fall into that category. And so that may also be exempt unless information has privately identifiable information in it, which again is the reason why we're going to be asking that the documents be comprehensively de-identified, because that process of de-identifying helps this exemption status to be applicable to this project. Now, if it doesn't receive an exemption, it may be a local IRB's decision for an expedited review. And the expedited review is possible if there's minimal risk to the participants involved. And minimal risk is the extent to which there may be or could be any sort of harm to the participants. And that we'll have sample language, and Larry's going to talk about this a little bit, but essentially because these results will be presented in aggregate and they're going to be de-identified, there should be actually zero risk to students, because a lot of the samples are going to be taken from fall of 2016. We won't be evaluating and doing the assessments until spring of 2016. So if there was any potential risk to students, the fact that their grade in the course and their status in the course for which they submitted that assignment is completely 100% settled at the institution before we ever begin work and before anyone in this project ever has access to the samples of student work that have been de-identified. And so we're taking great care to try to design the way we're doing this project so that if you do get to an expedited review or the review process, hopefully it will at least be an expedited review, because we've tried to eliminate any potential risk to the student participants involved. The last item to address is the notion of informed consent, and that is if you're doing research that involves human participants, they need to be informed of what their participation is and of the potential risks. Now, in some instances, that informed consent can be waived, and these are the 4 instances in which informed consent may be waived. And again, I've already addressed that first idea, is that the project involves no more than minimal risk to the subjects. And I've also addressed, I think, in the last slide, the fact that not informing students will not adversely affect the rights and welfare of the students. And then the third is that we do believe that the project could not practically be carried out without the waiver, because we're taking random samples at our own institutions from very large populations of students, and trying to get an informed consent from those would likely be a constraint on this project that would prohibit local institutional approval. I know that even locally within our institution that if we were to try to do informed consent, that would probably interfere with our ability to get this work done in order to pull the samples. And then the last item is talks about if the subjects are provided with additional pertinent information after they participate when it's appropriate. Again, that's a local IRB decision, a local institutional decision. Kind of the way we're designing this, the fact that we're doing the comprehensive de-identification, and that the assessment will not happen until after the fact, and after the students have completed their semester in which they're submitting the assignments that we're assessing. And then also that there's never going to be any publication of results other than aggregate college or project-wide, then it really kind of limits the necessity or the appropriateness of providing additional information back to the participants, because we're really kind of removing ourselves from the classroom through several different steps. So that with our design, we do hope that the informed consent can be waived for this project. Okay, and Larry's going to tell us a little bit about FERPA and the implications for this project.
Thank you, Chris. We do, with this project, have some FERPA issues and concerns that we need to pay attention to in the process as we work through the project. We want to make very sure that we, of course, respect FERPA requirements, and that we are living up to those FERPA requirements that we have. One important element in what we're doing in this project is that we are doing our best to make sure that all the personally identified information or identifiable information is removed from these pieces of student work that we get. And that's why we're asking all institutions to make sure that work that they contribute to the project, names are removed, course information is removed, and also the metadata is removed from those assignments that they might contribute to the process, so that we couldn't tie back to any specific student the work. And also another important factor in this process is dealing with FERPA is that we are involved in this project for one main reason, and that is to improve instruction, to improve the delivery of the core in the state of Texas. That's what we're focusing on. We're not focusing on individual student performance, but we are focusing on how can we best improve the delivery of the core in the state of Texas, of course. Language that you may have to provide to your local campus for the IRB approval process. The project is expecting, and Chris and I have sort of set out some expectations of what we want to see as far as IRB approval and also compliance with FERPA. We want all the participating institutions to provide a local IRB or a general institutional approval that addresses the protection of the human participants. We say either or because some institutions, especially community colleges, don't necessarily have an IRB on campus. So if you don't have an IRB, an institutional review board, then general approval from the institution. We have asked for approval at least from the chief academic officer. I'll talk in just a minute about SFA and how that might also be relevant to SFA, even though we do have an institutional review board on campus. As we developed this process and developed the project, we firmly believe that participation in this project is exempt, should fall under the exempt category, and that this is really looking at standard educational practices and that's institutional effectiveness process that we're involved in. We're not really involved in research as we traditionally think of it, but more institutional effectiveness. Also, the way we have structured the sample and the collection of the sample should lend itself to the fact that we are falling in the exempt category because we are not collecting information on individual students. We don't want that individual student information. We are not going to use that individual student information in this project at all. Now, if you need some sample language for how you might approach your institutional review board, or you might approach your chief academic officer, some language will be provided to you. You can find it on the Leap Texas website. And if you'll go on the Leap Texas website and under the Development Hub, you can find the Texas Assessment Collaborative, and you will find the IRB language that we're suggesting there. We will have a document, a one-page document that kind of gives an outline of what might be required of you to provide and some suggestions about how you might respond to those requests. And then I believe also Chris is going to provide the language that they used at Sanjac. Is that correct, Chris?
Yes, we'll have, I'm looking at having two things available. One is we are participating in the multi-state collaborative, and so we have an informal IRB that's around kind of our grants and research office, because that's where most of our external kind of data goes out through. And so I'll have the language that we shared or we used locally for that informal process to approve our participation in the multi-state collaborative. And I think that a lot of the language that we use for that here locally would apply to developing a similar document for participation in this project. The other thing that was looking at drafting is that we'll have maybe a sample if you don't have an informal IRB or anything like that type of a process, and it's just going to be an institutional approval from chief academic officer or the college president or chancellor, then having kind of draft language as a starting point that'll have some information about the project and some other things that may help as well.
And I will say that the project has been developed with an eye toward what the Multi-States Collaborative has done also in the area of IRB approval and FERPA. They have had to take all these things into consideration as they develop their project, and we have tried to parallel their approaches as well. So what do we need from you? What has to be submitted to us? We will need from you either your IRB approval, or we will need from you a statement from the Chief Academic Officer saying that the project has been approved and that the institution can participate, and in reference specifically to the protection of human subjects, and that has been approved from an institutional perspective. The deadline for that will be August the 15th, 2016. Chris, did you want to say anything else about that?
One of the things is that Larry and I will be available through the summer if you have questions. Kind of the hope is that between now and the end of the summer that our local institutions, we can take care of this kind of preliminary approval so that when we get to the fall semester, then we can turn our attention to the logistics and the mechanics around collecting those samples and getting them submitted to the electronic system that we'll be using.
All right, let's take a look at some local practices in relationship to Institutional Review Board approval and FERPA. First, going to talk about Stephen F. Austin and how we handle any institutional effectiveness process at the institution in relationship to IRB approval. And you'll need to look at your policy on your campus and see what your policy says. Some policies may specifically deal with issues like this. Other policies may not deal with issues clearly like this. At Stephen F. Austin, our policy very specifically mentions program assessment. This project would fall under program assessment because core curriculum is considered a program. And so it falls under our policy, which basically says, and it's highlighted in red there, that program assessment is not considered to be require IRB approval. So we do not, for assessment processes at the university, institutional effectiveness processes, we do not go through IRB approval. So the anticipation is that this project would not have to go through IRB approval at the institution. Other elements of our policy at Stephen F. Austin that would be related to that, to this project, that would be related to our policy would be, for example, in our policy under the exempt research category, you can see things like the research is conducted in established or commonly accepted educational settings that involve common educational practices, which this would fall under, and research involving the use of educational tests where information is reported in a manner that does not identify subjects directly or indirectly. That is relevant to this project. Research involving collection and study of existing data, which this student work is existing data or existing documents. So I feel very comfortable that under our policy at Stephen F. Austin that this project really wouldn't have to go to an institutional review board process, and that if it was decided that it did have to, it would still fall under the exempt category based on our policy. And again, I would say that you need to look at your policy at your institution to see where your policy falls. Is it clearly stated in your policy that institutional effectiveness processes are exempt from the IRB process, or is it implied? At our institution, when we started doing assessment for institutional effectiveness, we made sure that our processes at the university were compliant with our policy, and that our policy did not exclude what we were doing in institutional assessment. And essentially what would happen at SFA would be that the approval would come not from the Institutional Review Board, but from our Chief Academic Officer for our participation in this process. So I feel pretty confident that we do not have to go through the IRB process. If we do, even if we are sent to the IRB process, I feel confident that it will fall in through the exempt category. Chris is going to tell us about Sanjak's process now.
Okay, at Jacinto College, of course, here kind of a lot of the same. The primary difference is that we do not have a formal institutional review board. As I mentioned earlier, we have kind of an informal process that we have one of the directors in our grants office and our director of research and institutional effectiveness provide recommendations to our chancellor regarding any incidents in which we're going to have data of any sort leaving the institution, any capacity. And of course, we consider our annual project around general education outcomes assessment exempt because it's a standard assessment institutional effectiveness activity. Plus, we configure the collection system that we use internally to not provide student identifying information, so that when we have evaluators looking at documents, that they're not seeing any information about the student that our system provides. We even go so far as to recommend our faculty and ask our faculty to ask students when they're submitting this assignment to Blackboard for us, that they don't include identifying information, just exclude, don't put a heading on it basically, because then that helps de-identify the documents once our evaluators actually get to them. And then once we get to a project like this, it further helps us in that when we're collecting these to provide them and upload them through the Texas Assessment Collaborative's project website, that they're already de-identified and we don't have to do as much work de-identifying those. We also locally limit the exposure of these documents because it's a little bit different. It's still institutional effectiveness at its core, but we still keep in mind to limiting the exposure of what we're doing, where we're taking samples of student work and having faculty evaluators outside of the faculty teaching the course assessing that document. Even though we know full well that it's institutional effectiveness because we're attending to accreditation requirements around SACS principles 3.5 and 3.3.1.1, I think. And so we know that we don't have to have that internal, we don't have to have any sort of approval to do the project internally, but we still take a lot of care around limiting the exposure of this and not having just samples of student work flying all over the college. And then also we adhere to very strict, explicitly stated principles for how we publish the results. Maintaining the confidentiality, we publish in aggregate only. We never disaggregate beyond the purposeful designed sample methods, so that if we take a sample so that we're looking at results across our entire core, we do not disaggregate into subgroups of students or faculty or divisions or departments. And so that's also kind of one of the things locally that we do. And you see, I think a lot of this, as Larry and I have talked, a lot of this stuff is kind of carrying into this project, in that we want to structure the project so that it's as easy as possible at the local institutions to get either the IRB or the institutional approval. The last thing and I mentioned this earlier, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we have gone through the informal process for approval for the multi-state collaborative, and it was really addressing all the same issues of, what's going to be involved, is it de-identified, and how is the data going to be used, and then who's going to have access to that data if it's anyone beyond San Jacinto College personnel. And so we'll make those available as well, because we have been through the process locally of going through that institutional review or informal IRB process to have a project very much like the Texas Assessment Collaborative for it to be approved at the institutional level.
Okay, what's next? What are the next steps that we need to take for the Texas Assessment Collaborative? First thing we'd like for you to do is consider and provide feedback regarding the IRB or institutional approval requirements that we have set forth for the Texas Assessment Collaborative. Those of you who have indicated that you would like to be a participating institution in the collaborative, make sure that you are working through this process for the IRB and institutional approval with a goal toward having that completed and submitted by August the 15th, 2016. And as Chris said earlier, if you're in process, you need information from us, you have a question, there are concerns on your campus, if you're going through an IRB approval process, if your Chief Academic Officer has questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We will be happy to answer any questions and help you in any way that we can. And also remember, this webinar, the other webinars, and also sample language dealing with IRB and FERPA are going to be available to you on the LEAP Texas website under the Development Hub under the Texas Assessment Collaborative link. Questions? Do we have any questions from anyone? Has anyone worked through the IRB process as of yet on the Texas Assessment Collaborative? Has anyone started the process? If we don't have any questions from anybody or any comments from anybody, please, again, feel free to email Chris or myself or give us a call, contact us. Also, you can reach us on Twitter. We both have our Twitter handles out there for you. Please let us know if you need help, have questions or concerns through this process. We're here to help you, and we want to make sure that this project is successful. Before we go, again, any questions from anyone? Everybody seems quiet out there. If there are no questions, again, please let us know if we can help you in any way, shape, or form as you work through this process. And we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you for joining us today. Remember that the next workshop, Chris, can we back up one slide?
Oh, no, that was one that was a reminder of this one that we forgot to take off.
All right. Do we have the date for the next workshop?
We don't. We're going to be working on and looking at a kind of a plan to go through the summer over the next couple of weeks. And for folks that have interest in those, we will be posting, when we have a schedule, we will be posting that through the LEAP Texas website and then also through the listserv and through the Twitter account as well.
I would remind you, however, that going on this week is the Teamwork Twitter chat, and also you can find other information on Teamwork at the LEAP Texas website. Resources. If you did not get the email from Terry DiPaolo or see the email on the LEAP Texas listserv, let me know and I will make sure that I get you that email with that information. So if you're interested in teamwork and how people are assessing teamwork across the state, again, that is going on this week on Twitter, and you can follow that on at LEAP Texas. The hashtag is LEAP Texas. So thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.